On today's Apple Daily, we are answering your Apple questions, so let's get right into them. So how this works, if you want to ask your own question here on iCaveAnswers, all you need to do is ask any question you want to down in the comments section, use the hashtag iCaveAnswers, and then I will know that you want me to answer it in the show. If you just ask me a question, I won't assume that you want your name put out there, and I will just answer it in the comments for you. But that being said, let's get into the first question.
Viewer Blue asks, iCaveAnswers, do you think that Intel will go bankrupt or even lose market share? In the computer department, what might happen to Intel? Do you think that Intel has to worry? Because they still hold the majority in computer chips. And by what time did Apple start to hate and separate from Intel? 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019?
So, interesting question, this one. This is about what is going to happen to Intel. We've had a few questions like this, so there might be some more coming up in the show, so hold on for those. But Apple didn't hate Intel, it's just exactly what happened the last time when Apple did a big shift in the kind of chips that they use. Basically, Intel just isn't able to make chips that make the computers that Apple wants to build these days. So Intel has struggled with bringing down their process size, so basically how big each transistor is in the circuits that they're building. TSMC at this point is kind of the company that is leading the world in making the best chips in terms of efficiency and everything else. But also when you go back to when the iPhone was first introduced, Apple wanted to work with Intel on the chips to go into the iPhone. Intel wasn't interested, they didn't think it was going to be a big enough market, and that was probably a poor business decision from Intel's point of view, which is why Apple then went down the route of going with ARM, and they used an off-the-shelf ARM Cortex processor, I believe it was, that was made by Samsung. They underclocked it to about 420 Hz, something like that. Once they got to, I think, 3 generations down the line, the iPhone 4 was built with their own first custom processor. It had first actually been used in the iPad, the original iPad, the A4, and then it was used in the iPhone 4, and then since then, the A4, A5, A6, Apple's own silicon designs have been used for pretty much everything from iPhones, iPads. Your AirPods have got Apple designed chips inside them. The Apple Watch has got its own S-series chips. The HomePod, the Apple TV uses, I think for the 4K one, it uses an A10X chip from an iPad. For the previous version, I think it used an A8, which was for the regular resolution version. But yeah, pretty much everything that Apple does now has got its own Apple-designed processors inside, and then TSMC builds them for them. So it's not that Apple kind of fell out of love with Intel, but Intel has kind of got a little bit weird about things since the breakup. Sometimes you do have an X that's a little bit weird, and that seems to be what Intel is right now. But in terms of when they decided that they needed to move away, I think they've known for a few years that they're going to need to. Intel has really been struggling, as I say, to reduce those node sizes, which means that the heat goes up, that makes it less efficient, and I think probably the turning point was around about 2015 when Apple was trying to introduce that 12-inch MacBook form factor that was fanless. It had the butterfly keyboard, but the less said about that, the better. Apple was expecting Intel to have a more efficient chip with a bit more power, but they didn't, so it was underpowered, it overheated, and it just generally wasn't very good. And that wasn't particularly Apple's fault, but it was because of the expectation that they had on Intel. And I think since then, they've kind of decided, let's push our own chips. And when you look at the graphs now, they've overtaken Intel in terms of pretty much everything they need.
Viewer I Like Among Us asks, iCaveAnswers, how long will Intel still alive? And what will happen to gamers? Will they go to AMD? Or even Apple?
So I don't think there's actually too much of a fear that Intel will go out of business. They are a huge company. They're just not having a great time at the moment. They have now got Pat Gelsinger back on board, who is the new CEO. He is an engineer by background, whereas previously Intel has had a bit of a reputation of bringing in kind of money people to be at the top rather than people that actually know what they're doing with chips. So I actually think Intel are going to do quite well with Pat Gelsinger, but I'm not upset that Apple's moved away. Apple and their products were a lot more special, I think, when they were using PowerPCs, not because of PowerPC, but because it was just different. And the whole kind of point of Apple was that they did things differently. And when they were just using off-the-shelf parts, Intel CPUs, AMD graphics cards, all that kind of stuff. It just kind of, it was a PC that happened to run macOS, whereas now everything's going to be vertically integrated, everything's going to be designed specifically for macOS, and therefore it's just going to run better, exactly the same as iPhones wouldn't be great at running Android necessarily. I mean, they might be fine, but they're perfect for running iOS because Apple knows what they're going to do with their software, and they put the stuff into the chips that will support it, and vice versa. The software supports exactly what the chips can do, and it's optimized for it, and they don't have to optimize for all of these different platforms. In fact, it's going to be even better for Apple now because they're probably going to have to optimize for maybe 3 chips each generation instead of, I mean, what did we have before? We probably had like 5 or 6 different SKUs of i5s, 3 or 4 i7s, a couple of i9s, as well as the different graphics cards. And now the cores are going to be the same regardless of how many cores are there, so the software just needs to know what cores it's got to take advantage of. It's going to be a much, much easier and more streamlined process for Apple.
Viewer Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCaveAnswers, do you think in the future, systems composed with hierarchical multiple POCs, packages on the chip, so M1X type SoC plus extra accelerator dies like extra controllers, coders, decoders, and or extra cache memory pipeline, for example, could become as a premium upgrade option?
That sounds really complicated, and I don't know. I think we covered pretty much in yesterday's video what we are expecting to come from the Apple Silicon stuff. I don't think you're going to get customizable CPUs. I just don't think that the system on a chips are going to be customizable in anything other than the amount of unified memory that you chuck in there, and they are going to be very limited options, and it's all going to be from the factory. There's going to be no aftermarket stuff. I don't think you're asking about aftermarket here. I think you're asking about the main kind of stuff. I don't think they will, because Apple doesn't want to make stuff complicated. That's one of their biggest things. Whenever they jump on stage, they don't talk about processor speeds. They don't talk about CPUs and clock speeds and stuff like that. Like, the Apple Silicon event was probably the closest we've ever had to them talking about the actual performance of the individual chips, rather than the system in general can do this and this and this. Because it's a new chip system, it's a new chip generation, it's a completely new architecture, basically for the desktop, although Apple has been using these kinds of chips for iPads and iPhones for many years, so it's not, when everyone was talking about it being a first generation product, no it's not. Apple's been running macOS on iPads for God knows how long, behind the scenes, but not as iPads, but just using those chips and running macOS on it to see what they can do. But no, I don't think we're going to see kind of customizable, pick your own memory pipeline stuff. I think that's far too complicated, and Apple just wants to make stuff that works, and you don't have to worry about why it works or how it works.
Viewer Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCave David Eden-Sangwell iCaveAnswers, I wonder if there would be a noticeable long workload difference if someone were to watercool M1X as compared to stock? Maybe someone should make a video about it for the heck of it.
This sounds exactly like the kind of thing that Linus Tech Tips and those kind of channels will probably do, because they don't understand. Now, I see why they do it. It is interesting. I will watch those videos, absolutely, and that is really what these things are about on YouTube. But for M1, at least, there is no need to. The M1 in a Mac Mini with a little fan in it is not going to throttle. I don't think we've seen it throttle. I haven't personally seen mine throttle that I'm aware of, but I'm also not running massive amounts of stuff to monitor all of that kind of thing. The MacBook Air will, over a sustained workload. However, I don't think that the MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini do. If you found them throttling, let me know. M1X could be a little bit different. Maybe water cooling that might be an interesting thing, and certainly once we get up to the 32 core stuff that we were talking about yesterday, that is definitely going to be worth having a look at. But even then, we were talking about the 20 core, which is going to be 16 Firestorm cores and 4 Ice Storm cores. That's probably still only going to be a 100 watt chip compared to the Threadripper that it kind of sits toe to toe with, that is 280 watts of electricity, of power, of energy that you need to kind of dissipate. So I don't think there's going to be any struggles with it. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun. If you want to water cool something, why not?
Viewer Mikey asks, iCaveAnswers, why do you think that news headlines are saying that iOS 14.4.2 is an emergency? What is your opinion? Is it a vulnerable attack? What happened?
Okay, so yeah, iOS 14.4.2 was released earlier this week, or end of last week. It is basically a security patch, and it is for an exploit that is active. Now, I don't believe that Apple has put out much more detail than that, and the reason for that is that they don't want to kind of tip everyone's hand to what is wrong with a phone. Like, behind the scenes, they have released this stuff to security researchers and stuff like that, don't get me wrong, but because they've now patched it, it is just a case of install the patch and you're good. But it was an active exploit that was being exploited, which is why they've pushed it out this quickly. Now, we have got iOS 14.5 that is pretty much ready to go, and that is likely to come out at the next event, because Apple is likely to want to talk about things like the Face ID unlock, which obviously we all know about, that you can do it with your watch if you're wearing a mask, but the general public doesn't. They're going to want to talk about the app tracking transparency, the stuff that Facebook is really sad about. That's something that they will need to talk about on stage. But in the meantime, they've had to push out this little security update because something's happening right now, and they've needed to kind of just cover the bases for it. So that's all it is. Still a very small vulnerability, I would assume, but I don't have any more details to give you, I'm afraid.
Viewer Savik Mukherjee asks, after a long time, how many ports should we expect to get with the 14-inch M1X MBP? Also, do you think that the 14-inch would be the sweet spot for most consumers? Make 6K.
Now, it's important to remember that the people that watch this channel are not normal consumers. I think the 14-inch is likely to be a good sweet spot for a lot of the people that watch this channel, but I don't think it is for normal consumers. I think the sweet spot for the normal consumer is the MacBook Air with M1. Because the vast majority of people that are buying a Mac do not need a great deal of power. The M1 chip has got a ridiculous amount of power for most users. As they said when they were on stage, it is faster than something like 97% of laptops that are being sold right now. We always, because we're kind of interested in tech, in the kind of people that watch this channel, if you're watching a channel that's about technology, you are in kind of the 1%. So do not assume that everyone else kind of wants what we do. And I always kind of cite this with upgradability and things. The vast majority, probably over 90% of people that buy a computer will never upgrade it at all, regardless of how modular it is. Even if it's a tower PC, 90% of those tower PCs will never get an extra stick of RAM put in them. We're all complaining that we can't replace our own SSDs because they're soldered down. We can't replace our own RAM in these tiny, thin laptops that perform incredibly well. We are not the typical consumers. I also don't care, because I would prefer to be a typical consumer. I prefer to have stuff that just works for me. I don't want to be fiddling around with it all the time. But in terms of your actual question, I don't think that the 14-inch is going to be the sweet spot for most people. I think that is going to be like your mid-level professionals, so people that are maybe photographers or graphic designers, but need that level of portability. I do think that there will certainly be some people that just want to go for that one because it is the better one, but not as expensive as the 16-inch. And in terms of the port selection that we're going to get, now we've heard a few different things. I think we're probably going to get 2 USB-C ports. I think we're going to get 1 USB-A port, but it'll be USB-A 3. We'll get a MagSafe, and we'll get HDMI of some sort. I'm not sure whether it's going to be a full-sized HDMI or if it's going to be a smaller HDMI mini or micro. And I think we're going to get our SD card reader back as well. That's my predictions for it, but we will see. I think the 16-inch might well get 4 USB-C ports, and then all the other stuff is the same. Oh, and a headphone jack. You'll probably still get a headphone jack. Maybe.
Viewer Savik Mukherjee asks, iCaveAnswers, could Apple be a bit more aggressive by dropping down the price of the regular non-mini and non-pro iPhone to $700, 12S, 13, etc., which might be a sweet spot? Rene Ritchie talked about this some time ago, but I want to know your thoughts. Make 6K.
So we're talking about the kind of iPhone 13 nothing here, or the iPhone 12S nothing. So not the mini, not the Pro, not the Pro Max. Bring that down to $700. They could. I don't think they need to. There was a lot of talk when the iPhone 12 came out that the prices had increased by like $130 for the base iPhone 12 because the base iPhone 11 sat in that spot that the iPhone 12 mini currently sits in. Now, I don't agree, to be completely honest. I don't think that the base price has gone up because look at the other stuff that we're getting now. We're getting a Super Retina OLED display in all of them. We're getting better cameras, we're getting all the usual stuff. Everything gets upgraded every year. But this year, going from an LCD screen to an OLED is a massive difference. And the amount of pixels, if you actually look at the pixel density, even the iPhone 12 mini has more pixels in it than the iPhone 11 did last year, and it's at the same price point. So I think form factor and the physical size of the device is not what should dictate what kind of the base level is. So I don't think just because the mini says mini in front of it, you should think of it as an inferior phone to what the 11 was. So that's just my thought process. Although the screen size, physical dimensions is the same between the 11 and the 12, I think the mini is the one that replaces the 11 because it has the more compact design. That's just my thoughts. And in terms of that price increase affecting sales, it clearly hasn't because the iPhone 12 is the most successful iPhone launch in years and years. It's going to do about 250 million units, it looks like, in its first year, which is pretty incredible. I think it's up from about 213 with the iPhone 11. So I don't think that's an issue. I don't think they will drop the pricing. What I do think they might do is they might keep around the 12 nothing and drop that down to the old iPhone 11 pricing. The 11 drops down maybe or disappears. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I think the 10R is definitely going to be gone this year.
Viewer Savik Mukherjee asks, iCaveAnswers, what exact customization options would you like to see on iOS 15? Because believe it or not, we do care about aesthetics a lot, and so addition of any cool feature is always appreciated. One thing I want to mention that the app stack feature on my 11 Pro has been awesome. Thanks, smiling face with smiling eyes and rosy cheeks.
That's probably going to be one of the big things they bring to iOS 15. I think that Apple has probably seen how popular shortcuts customizing for individual app icons has been, and I think they're probably going to try and make it easier because it is not an easy way of doing it at the minute. It is very convoluted, and Apple has now seen how much people wanted to do it because they were literally doing it to the point where they were going through individually replacing each icon by setting up shortcuts that were at one point even going through the Shortcuts app to get to it, and that's not the way that Apple wants you to use your phone. They want it to look like it's just native. So I think we might see real icon customization coming. I think that will be a good possibility. I think we'll see widgets get a little bit smarter, so you'll actually be able to have more active stuff going on in the widgets rather than just being kind of a static thing that takes you to the app. I think it will be a lot more dynamic. I think we will get more widgets that can do more on your screen without you having to go into the app. I mean, could we see finally a time when Apple lets us put in blank spaces so we can put the apps where we want? So we could just have apps at the bottom of the screen instead of all at the top and kind of filling up from the top of that screen. That would be something that would just be a quality of life thing for a lot of people. I mean, that blank space seems pointless to me, but some people like to just look at their wallpaper. Other than that, I think we need to do a whole video on iOS 15. So if you guys have got any suggestions for what you would want to see in iOS 15, I would love to know down in the comments. Use hashtag iOS 15. That just makes sense.
Viewer Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCave, David Eden-Sangwell care to make power draw and temperature predictions for M1X, especially for bigger iMacs?
So I think we're probably going to be looking at around about 45 watts, between 35 and 45 watts, with 45 at kind of the peak end, maybe pushing as far as 50 watts, absolute maximum. So these are not going to be hot chips still. It's going to be very much manageable for whatever cooling they put in. I don't think you're going to hear the iMacs in terms of fans. I don't think you're going to hear the laptops with them with fans. I don't think even if you put it in a Mac Mini, you're going to hear the fans. That would be my expectations. I know with the M1s, they have been able to get up to quite high temperatures, but even the fan curves for these are quite aggressive for the laptops that have got fans in them, and they don't tend to get super hot. So I think in terms of thermals, I think we're looking probably a TDP of between 40 and 45 watts.
Viewer Bibba67 asks iCaveAnswers, do you think the iPhone 13 will have mini LED?
Nope, don't think we're going to be getting mini LED because we're already on OLED, which is basically a better looking version of mini LED. Mini LED is great for bigger screens, but you would need to be going to micro LED in order to go into a phone or something like that, which would again eliminate the issues that we have with OLED, where they can do screen burn-ins, they can have issues of color consistency across larger panels, but again with a phone you're not going to have that issue particularly. What we are getting, it looks like, is LTPO displays in the iPhone 13 Pros or the iPhone 12s Pros, whatever they're going to call it, and the LTPO displays basically is low temperature polymer oxide, I think, something like that. And basically that allows you to have the variable refresh rates, which hopefully will mean we might get a always on display option on those phones, but it also will mean that we are able to vary between like 24 frames and 120 frames a second for these phones. So we'll be able to have the more fluid animation, and it will also be able to more natively show things like cinematic content. But no mini LED in the phones.
Viewer Joe asks iCaveAnswers, what other tech YouTubers you watch when you're not recording editing? Popcorn.
So the big ones that I watch would be Rene Ritchie. I watch a bit of Max Tech. I watch a bit of, obviously I watch John Prosser whenever he puts something out with Front Page Tech. iUpdate, I will watch iUpdate. I don't always agree with Sam on what he says, but I do find him entertaining actually. Luke Miani, really love Luke Miani's stuff, especially when he's repairing old Macs. Really enjoy that kind of content. And then smaller creators, Saran Bytes, I'm really enjoying his videos right now. If you haven't checked him out, go and do that. Tech Hyped, if you want to know anything about iOS, that's your guy for iOS. He does reviews of literally like every beta as they come out on a whole bunch of different phones. Zolotech, yeah, quite a few. I will watch as well Linus Tech Tips stuff, although I'm not really into computers. I really enjoy their kind of entertainment style that they do. The kind of videos that I really loved from Linus Tech Tips was the Scrapyard Challenge stuff, where they'd be going out and trying to build a PC to a budget. I thought they did really well with that stuff. Again, I don't really agree with some of the stuff that he says about Macs, but actually he is pretty fair in most cases. And I think he kind of had to eat his words a little bit about Apple Silicon once he actually got his hands on it and played with it, and then was like, yeah, this destroyed my expectations.
Viewer Phil Rosaleek asks iCaveAnswers, hi David, what's your take on the thermal pad mod some are doing with their MPAs?
Now, I haven't actually seen much about this online, but I'm assuming it is where you add a thermal pad so that you are using the bottom of the chassis as kind of a heatsink, which I think is something that Linus Tech Tips has done on their channel, and they seemed kind of confused why Apple hadn't done this already, and then I think they realised why it was going on, because they burnt their legs on it. So in the MacBook Air, Apple actually insulates the bottom plate from the heat sinks and the kind of big thermal mass that they have inside, which is a big block of aluminium basically, that the CPU can dump heat into until that becomes saturated. Now what some people are doing is adding a thermal pad, I believe, between that heatsink and the bottom of the chassis to allow the chassis itself to become a larger heatsink, larger heat spreader, so that it can dissipate heat more quickly. Now that's fine if you're going to use it on a desk, but you don't want to be using it on your lap like that, because the bottom of the case is going to get too hot, and that's going to be uncomfortable and possibly actually burn you if you're doing like high load workflow stuff. Now I think Linus and those guys have also done in the past, not with M1 but with the previous MacBook Airs, they've like water cooled it by like adding a cooler to the bottom of the case, things like that. It's interesting and it's a fun experiment to do. It's not a great idea though, I don't think. Apple insulated it for a reason, because they want it to be a comfortable experience, and if you've bought the MacBook Air, you shouldn't really be using it in a way that it gets that hot in the first place that it can't dissipate the heat. And if you are, you should kind of expect it to throttle a little bit, because you've bought a quite fast laptop that has no fan and is absolutely capable of doing the work, but it might just have to slow itself down, and there's a reason that it does that, which is to protect the CPU. Now, if you can funnel that heat away, brilliant, but don't do it in a way that's going to burn yourself, because that doesn't seem like a great idea at all. So thank you all for joining me today. If you've got a question that you want me to answer in a future show, all you need to do is use hashtag iCaveAnswers down in the comments, and I will answer it in a future show for you. Until then, let's subscribe to the channel, that would be lovely, and I will see you in the next one.